Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Matthew, chapter 14, verses 13 through 36. Now, when Jesus heard about the death of John, he went away from there privately in a boat to an isolated place. But when the crowd heard about it, they followed him on foot from the towns. As he got out, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. When evening arrived, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is an isolated place, and the hour is already late. Send the crowds away so that they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But he replied, "They don't need to go. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. "Bring them here to me," he replied. Then he instructed the crowds to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He gave them to the disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowds. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up the broken pieces left over, 12 baskets full. Not counting women and children, there were about 5,000 men who ate. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dispersed the crowds. And after he sent the crowds away, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat, already far from land, was taking a beating from the waves because the wind was against it. As the night was ending, Jesus came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost," and cried out with fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, "Have courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, order me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. And when he saw the strong wind, he became afraid and started to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they went up into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." After they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret. When the people there recognized him, they sent word into all the surrounding area, and they brought all their sick to him. They begged him if they could only touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. Yeah, so you have here the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on the water, and then Jesus giving the power to walk on water to Peter. It's pretty amazing just how I just think about this time and time again, how miraculous happenings don't necessarily entail faithfulness on our part. It doesn't dissuade doubts from happening, and it doesn't keep our minds centered on the one who performed the miraculous happening. Because, Peter later then denies Christ. So, he was moved with compassion for the crowd. The great compassion of Jesus for the multitude moved him to heal the sick, to teach them. Jesus did this all the way until evening. His gracious compassion for the demanding crowds was remarkable. Jesus had come to find peace and quiet and loneliness. Instead, he found a vast crowd eagerly demanding what he could give. He might so easily have resented them. What right had they to invade his privacy with their continual demands? Jesus and the disciples could have made many legitimate excuses. This isn't the right place. This isn't the right time. The people can take care of themselves. Indeed, there was no physical necessity to feed this multitude. These were people who were used to skipping meals, and they certainly expected nothing. Yet Jesus had compassion on them nonetheless. His compassion was great. The original word is very expressive. His whole being was stirred to its lowest depth, and therefore he proceeded at once to work miracles of mercy among them. From Spurgeon. You give them something to eat. With this, Jesus challenged both the compassion and the faith of the disciples, yet he did not ask them to do anything to meet the need without also guiding them through the work. If they remembered the miracle of wine in Cana, they should have asked Jesus to meet the need, not send the people away. Spurgeon used the words, "They do not need to go away," as the basis of a sermon. The theme of the sermon was that if there was no need for these most casual hearers of Jesus to depart, there is even less reason for the follower of Jesus to go away from continual communion and fellowship with Jesus. Circumstances don't need to make you go away. You won't have things so hard or so easy that you don't need Jesus. There's nothing in Jesus that would make you want to go away. There's nothing in the future that will make you need to go away. We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. These were obtained from a little boy among the crowd. It is much to the credit of the disciples that they themselves traveled light, without carrying a lot of food for themselves. They trusted Jesus to make sure that they were prepared for. Yeah, and it's low-hanging fruit here, but might as well. I've often heard Muslim apologists claim that Jesus was a Muslim, and one of the evidences that they produce is Jesus' manner of prayer, that is, with the face to the ground, but that ignores all of the other instances where he assumes different forms for prayer, and especially like this style of prayer that is looking up with your face towards heaven is especially forbidden. But Jesus does just that. Looking up to heaven, he blessed. Jesus blessed the Father for the food that he did have. He may have prayed a familiar Jewish prayer before a meal. Blessed art thou, Jehovah our God, King of the universe, who bringest forth bread from the earth. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat. Jesus felt it was important for he and his followers to leave the area quickly. Perhaps this was to avoid the multitudes clinging to him as a potential source of constant bread. Therefore, Jesus compelled the disciples to get into the boat. He did this because he wanted to be alone to pray, because he wanted to escape the crowd and get some rest, and because he wanted the crowd to disperse so as to avoid a messianic uproar. He went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Jesus was jealous for time spent alone with his Father. In the midst of his great ministry to others, he could not neglect prayer. The boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. The Sea of Galilee is well known for its sudden storms, and during this storm, Jesus wasn't in the boat with the disciples. in the fourth watch of the night. This was somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., according to Mark. Jesus came to the disciples when the boat was in the middle of the sea, and after they had exhausted themselves rowing against the waves in windy storm. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. We have no idea what prompted Peter to ask such a question, but his faith in Jesus was remarkable. He really responded to Jesus' invitation and got out of the boat. The request is bold, but the disciples have been trained for some time and given power to do exactly the sort of miracles Jesus was doing. He walked on the water to go to Jesus, but when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink. This is a wonderful picture of walking in faith, showing that Peter was able to do the miraculous as long as he looked to Jesus. When he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was troubled by fear and began to sink. Yeah, and I think that provides an important lesson for us as Christians, that we need to have Jesus in mind and not the fear of whatever it is. In general, I guess, but specifically when serving Him, because I think it's very easy, well, at least for me, to let my fear overpower faith in God. So, but we have to, I have to, focus on Jesus. Why did you doubt? Jesus only asked this question once Peter was rescued. Yet at that point, it was an entirely reasonable question to ask. Why did Peter doubt? Doubt is literally be divided in two. True faith is single-mindedly focused on Jesus. If you believe a thing, you want evidence, and before you doubt a thing, you ought to have evidence too. To believe without evidence is to be credulous, and to doubt without evidence is to be foolish. We should have grounds for our doubts as well as a basis for our faith. Yeah. Those who were in the boat came and worshipped him. They moved quickly from fearing the storm to worshipping Jesus. This was a logical reaction considering the power Jesus showed in walking on the water and the love he showed in taking care of a sinking Peter. This is the first time we meet with so plain and open an acknowledgement of his being the Son of God. Yeah. Matthew rightly identifies here that that this is worship, that they are worshiping Jesus as God. Anyhow, carrying on here, Psalm chapter 18, verses 37 through 50. I chase my enemies and catch them. I do not turn back until I wipe them out. I beat them to death. They fall at my feet. You give me strength for battle. You make my foes kneel before me. You make my enemies retreat. I destroy those who hate me. They cry out, but there is no one to help them. They cry out to the Lord, but he does not answer them. I grind them as fine wind-blown dust. I beat them underfoot, like clay in the streets. You rescue me from a hostile army. You make me a leader of nations. People over whom I had no authority are now my subjects. When they hear of my exploits, they submit to me. Foreigners are powerless before me. Foreigners lose their courage. They shake with fear as they leave their strongholds. The Lord is alive. My protector is praiseworthy. The God who delivers me is exalted as king. The one true God completely vindicates me. He makes nations submit to me. He delivers me from my enemies. You snatch me away from those who attack me. You rescue me from violent men. So I will give you thanks before the nations, O Lord. I will sing praises to you. He gives his chosen king magnificent victories. He is faithful to his chosen ruler, to David and his descendants forever. Yeah. The psalmist remarks that God provides him military victory. You have delivered me from the strivings of the people. David knew that taking the throne of Israel was more than just a matter of removing Saul. There were also the strivings of the people, of those who did not immediately support David as king over a united Israel. Yeah, certainly. David dealt with his fair share of uprisings, even from his own sons. Therefore, I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the Gentiles, and sing praises to your name. On one level, this was David praising God for his deliverance and safety among his neighboring kingdoms. On a second level, Paul quotes this in Romans 15, 8-12, as the first of 4 Old Testament prophecies demonstrating that the work of Jesus Christ was not only for the Jewish people, but also for the Gentiles also. At this point, we are encouraged to look back over the entire psalm for messianic meanings. We can see many pictures of Jesus and his work in the psalm. Psalm 18, 1-6 suggests his death. The pangs of death encompassed me. The sorrows of Sheol surrounded me. The snares of death confronted me. Psalm 18, 7-18 suggests his resurrection. The earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the hills also quaked and were shaken. He sent from above. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy. Psalm 18, 19-27 suggests his exaltation. I have kept the ways of the Lord. I was also blameless before him. Therefore the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness. Psalm 18, 28-42 suggests his victory. For by you I can run against a troop. I have pursued my enemies and overtaken them. Jesus was strong enough to run against a troop and be victorious. The enemies against Jesus were strong and disciplined. Yet Christ confronted them and defeated them. Jesus was great enough to jump over a wall, the wall of God's holy law that separated us from him. He didn't destroy the wall. Instead, with his holy life, he jumped over it and fulfilled the law on our behalf. Psalm 18, 43-50 suggests his kingdom. You've made me the head of the nations. The foreigners submit to me. You also lift me up above those who rise against me. Therefore I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the Gentiles. To David and his descendants forevermore. Here David understood something by either intuition or by faith, something that would not be specifically promised to him until later. The promise was that David, and not Saul, would begin a hereditary monarchy in Israel, and that his descendants would also sit on the throne of Israel. This was the promise to build a house for David that God explicitly made in 2 Samuel 7, 1-17. I wonder... Interesting. Just looking in Blue Letter Bible, it lists the 2 pieces on "and his descendants" as being singular. That is, "and his descendant" forever. And finally, Proverbs chapter 4, verses 11-13. I will guide you in the way of wisdom, and I will lead you in upright paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hampered, and when you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to instruction. Do not let it go. Protect it, because it is your life. Yeah. Wisdom keeps you alive. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.